Moers, and welcome to Montgomery Week in Review. The Supreme Court recently heard a case to grant work permits and temporary residence status to those who cannot work legally and who are also parents of children who are U.S. citizens. Mariana Cordier, an attorney, will review this case and so much more. The use of illegal opioids by young people in Montgomery County and throughout our state has become a serious problem. Robert Hill, an attorney in the state's attorney's office, will describe the problem that can turn fatal quickly. Being hungry in Montgomery County may not touch the average person watching this program, but nevertheless remains the reality for many of our residents, too many of our residents. Greg Wims, the founder and president of the Victim Rights Association, has this story. The Rural Maryland Council has programs across the state, and because its funding comes from the state, it always has to pay attention to the actions of the General Assembly. Charlotte Davis, executive director of this great organization, will tell us about how her organization did during the 2016 General Assembly that just concluded, and what that session means to all of rural Maryland. Mariana Cordier, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Wow, it's not often that the Supremes tackle the issue of immigration, and you've got the president and the executive branch with the legislative branch.
It's almost like a law school question, right?
So this is,
does he or does he not have the power to make these executive orders? Does not Texas have, and the 26 states that
and
are
it's
behind
U.S. v.
it.
Texas?
Yes, U.S. v.
Right.
Texas have standing in the case. And so it's interesting also because they're short of justice because of the passing of Anton Scalia. So what's going to happen?
8 people. So let's
They have
pull
8
this
people
back
in
a little
court.
bit. As I understand the situation, you have the president had this DACA program, Deferred Action for Children,
Yes.
kids who were brought in by their families too young to make a decision. Then the president extended this a couple of years later,
Right.
to the parents of
U.S.
children.
children.
So
Children born in the United
so
States.
they came across.
They came across and they had a baby. And the baby is a United States citizen.
And the baby can,
Permanent
what is it? I guess the president of the baby as a U.S. citizen will be able to sponsor parents when he or she turns 21 years old.
Right. So the process with the laws as they stand right now, when the child turns 21, they can apply for their parents.
Sponsor their parents.
Sponsor their parents.
For
and
green
their
card or
parents
whatever.
would then become United States citizens. Well, first they have to go through the
Eventually.
process. Green card, which is a permanent residency, and then they become citizens. And they can then sponsor other family members.
So it's going to happen ultimately, and I guess the president's trying to keep families together, not being split. How can anybody be against this?
It's almost like this is a rush, So these United States citizen children, their parents, if you rush to get them deported, will that mean that then what happens? Do they take the children with them? Do the children stay here? That was the dilemma that Obama had. And so he had to find a way to fix this situation when Congress, got locked in, did not pass or make any amendments or laws to address this particular issue. And so what do you do when you're in the executive? So he took the position of issuing the executive orders that if you are a parent of a United States citizen child born here, and you don't have any criminal record, you're not in jail,
right,
and you're working and paying your taxes, you are not going to be deported. It's a defer.
How can you be against it?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Let me open this up. Yes.
Can you distill it down to the main legal issue?
Right. So the one issue that I find odd is the standing issue, because Texas is claiming that they're going to suffer, and the other states, a great economic loss because of their budgets. They haven't counted and factored in driver's licenses for these people.
Whoa. Driver,
Yes.
don't we pay
We pay our
a fee?
driver's license fee.
Right,
When you
so
go to the
what's the issue
MBA,
then?
you pay for it, right? But apparently the states subsidize a portion. So the true cost, for instance, for a Texas driver's license would be $64. They charge you $60. So the increase of having this population applying for a driver's license and that additional $4 is such a loss that they believe that it's a damage that they're suffering that's imposed to them by
Well, aren't
the
we
president.
just seeing this action because the Republicans in the ruling party in Congress have been unable to address the situation? Isn't this kind of an end run around?
Right. That's the
What's going on in
fundamentally core
Congress?
problem with this is that our immigration laws need to be, changed and adapted to the situation as it is standing now, and it hasn't been done. And so you're left with laws that make it, what if we deport the parents, are we putting all those children in foster care? What is the economic, budgetary impact of that? And not only that, but think about this population of children without their parents, without their family.
Or if they're denied, if they're forced to go out of
or
the
if they're
country
forced
to
to go out of
Mexico,
the
wherever,
country.
then they're denied the opportunities of being a U.S. citizen.
And all that it brings, because it's the bond with the country, it's the nationalism you feel.
But the question she's asking is this an end around by the executive? Isn't this really what Congress is supposed to do? And how
Yes.
can the executive be making
Yes.
laws that the
Well,
Congress
the executive in the past, and not just Obama, because let's be clear, Republicans have done this, have exercised it in different areas. For instance, the issue: are you declaring war? Are you not declaring war? Troops, in the environmental area and that kind of stuff. So it's not the only time it's happened. The question is, will this open Pandora's box?
But where does the
Where is that?
legislation stop, and where's
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask. So when
Got
are they
about a
going to
minute
hear
left
it?
in the segment.
I know we short one justice because of the death of Celia. So when will they take this up?
Well, they're going to reach a decision because it's been scheduled for such. I'm not sure.
Well,
on
they
the
just had the
date.
decision. I think it's June. I think
Yeah.
by the end of June they have to make decisions.
Yeah,
if I
they have
remember
to
my
make
Supreme Court.
Right, and if they tie, that means that the lower court's order stays in place, and there's an injunction against the president for being able to do what the executive orders say to do, which is to keep these people here.
What does it say about the president? We've got 30 seconds. President's legacy if this doesn't get overturned?
It's a huge disappointment for the Hispanic community because one of the promises made in getting him elected was for this to be not only healthcare, but this was supposed to happen, and it hasn't. And so that could be quite negative, actually.
Towards the president or towards Congress?
I think towards both.
Okay.
At this point, the temperature of the country is they're fed up with everybody.
But we're not fed up with you.
No, hope
Mariana
not.
Cordier, we can't wait to have you back.
Thank you.
Robert Hill, welcome.
Thank
It's
you
your
very
first
much.
time
Thank
on the
you.
show.
First
so
time on the show.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you very much.
But you're coming in here with a very disturbing story. Opioids, heroin for kids. I thought this was 30, 40 years ago, and now it's back? This is awful.
Who would have thought? But it is so addicting. Apparently, the first time heroin user becomes addicted, a quarter of the people who take it for the first time
Okay,
are hit.
but we're talking about affluent Montgomery County. We're talking about, certainly we have another story about the not so affluent part of Montgomery County, but we're talking about in general a place that's looked at as a successful place. Why are our kids turning to heroin? I don't get this.
There's no socioeconomic boundary here, but I'll tell you how it can happen. I'll give you an example. The athlete, the high school athlete who hurts his knee, and he goes to the doctor, and the doctor prescribes opioids, OxyContin,
Okay.
Percocet, to kill the pain. Well, those are the same derivatives of the poppy plant. The same thing with heroin. It's the same idea. In some cases, they're overprescribed. The athlete starts to become dependent, and when he gets off them, he starts feeling withdrawal. And when he goes back to get the prescription and is denied, he goes to the street.
So this is a situation where, we've had some discussions on this show before about the overprescriptions you just mentioned,
Yes.
the overprescribing of this. So many more controls now on doctors to keep them from continuing to just give out these pills.
Yes.
So this is a result of sort of no longer being able to give them out, and the only place they can turn now is towards these opioids, towards the heroin on the
Well,
streets.
what happens is you go to the street, and you might try to buy OxyContin from somebody on the street, but they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's going to cost you $80 for this tablet." So you turn to a heroin dealer, and the heroin dealer will give you a hit of heroin for $10. And so that's how it goes in the direction of heroin.
And I wanted to ask the numbers in Montgomery County so far this year that have actually died from overdose. And do you also know in the state of Maryland?
The figures, I believe in the state of Maryland, there have been approximately 600 overdoses. In Montgomery County in 2015, I believe there were 24 overdose deaths and something like another 60 overdoses where the person survived.
And these are younger people for the most part. When I say under 40?
The age group tends to be 18 to 30.
Okay.
So what happens when you have someone who is suffering an incident of overdose, and you're there and you're watching it happen, and you call 911? Can't you get in trouble for reaching out to save someone who's got this issue? I mean, it may actually deter you from calling the police.
That's a great question, and the legislature has recognized this, and they passed a Good Samaritan law, which basically says this, and that essentially, if you're with someone who's overdosing, and you call 911, even if the police arrive and there's heroin on the table or marijuana or whatever, you will not be prosecuted for possession of that or possession of the paraphernalia. And so we have a campaign, Speak Out and Save a Life. We're going into the schools and telling people, call 911 because you will have immunity against prosecution for that.
That's great, because that sometimes is such a crucial moment in that doubt. If you have it, the person can die.
That's right.
Now, the legislature has just passed that Justice Reinvestment Act legislation that talks a little bit about drug reform. Does that play, mental health
Yes, it does.
treatment? And so instead of sending offenders into jail, we're going to send them into treatment. Is that going to help with this problem?
Yes, it is. And the idea being that we're going to take the nonviolent people who shouldn't be there. We're going to save money, and with that money, we're going to put that into programs that will help, like drug treatment and things like that. So,
Yes, Robert, king of the world, you control the laws, you control whatever. What would give us some steps that you would want to see taken to deal with this opioid problem?
I think you have to have a multi-pronged approach. First off, I think that the governor has recognized this with his opiate and heroin emergency task force, and the idea is to get all of these agencies that worked in independent silos to now communicate, whether it's the Corrections Department, the State Police, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. They need to all work together.
And is this both the state and the county and localities working together, or is it still a silo state and a
No,
Montgomery
they
County?
should all be working together.
Okay.
And in fact, there was some legislation that passed this most recently, which will enable, under the direction of the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, for counselors and clinics to be set up here to
20 seconds left.
to deal with opioid and heroin abuse. So, but the second prong, there must be a law enforcement aspect as well, and we still need to target those people who are trafficking. And I don't mean the person that is selling a little hit to support his own habit. I mean the real trafficker.
Okay, and then that goes back to Afghanistan, poppy growers and Taliban and all of
That's
that.
right, and holding people accountable who distribute drugs that result in death.
Well, thank you for being here with this important story. I hope you'll come back.
Thank you.
Time
I'd
and
be
time
delighted.
again and give the state's attorney our best.
Thank you very much.
We'll be right back after these. And we're back. Greg Wims, we've had immigration, a serious issue with the Supreme Court. We've had this growing opioid issue in the state and the county. And now we deal with another serious issue, often in the shadows in this county, but incredibly serious nonetheless, and that's hunger.
You're absolutely right. And I want to start off before we open up to the panel here about a true story that happened just last month. We had a young lady that come to our Rotary Club. I'm a member of Rotary. And she was dressed just like we are. But she told her story just 8 months ago. She was very hungry, living on the streets. And the only reason is because she lost her job. She didn't have any family to turn to, so she couldn't eat. But that's just one of many stories in Montgomery County where you not only have those who you would expect, low income or that area of our county, but you have your middle class. If they lose their job and don't have help, they become hungry.
It's so fragile. I mean, we think we're all in great shape. We've got a job, and all of a sudden, I mean, the recession didn't hit us here as badly as it hit other parts of the country. But what you're saying with the professional is I think what we saw in so many different places where you got a family, you got a mortgage, and suddenly it doesn't take too much, and you're in the streets, aren't you?
Usually 2 paychecks, maybe 3 paychecks away from poverty, as I call it. But I also want to talk about something that we hear about, the free and reduced lunch program in the schools. We have, I don't know the number, but I know there are thousands of kids who get that.
Tens of thousands.
But on the weekend, those kids don't eat. So there are groups like Mana Care here, Mana Food, some Rotary clubs that feed approximately 6,000 of those kids on the weekend.
Right.
But what about the other thousands that don't have any food? So it is an issue.
You're active in this personally, aren't you?
I am. I have a group called KIND, the Kids in Need Distributor, and we deliver every week to about maybe 24 schools.
Okay.
And those kids get to eat. We give them 12 non-perishable items. But then there are others. We know there's a waiting list of maybe 5,000 to 6,000 more kids who actually go hungry, and they can't wait till Monday to come back to school so they can eat. So in Montgomery County, with 1 million plus people, there's a large number of those who are actually hungry during the week and those who are hungry on the weekend.
And the expense of living in this county, everything's so much more expensive than other areas. So for them to be able to, their parents or anyone to get them the food is almost twice as hard.
Yeah, and just getting affordable food.
Right.
I mean, not everybody can shop at Wegmans and Harris Teeter, and being able to go down to a local grocery store that has fresh, local, and affordable food is important.
You bring up this. We have the Ag Reserve in Montgomery County. We got a third of our county is in the Ag Reserve. It seems that we could be doing things in terms of community gardens, in terms of trying to have opportunities for people. Is there, but that's just a.
I have to say, since you
dream.
brought it up, I don't know the groups of myself that do that. I just know, like, we have the Manor, which everyone knows. We have Women Who Care Ministries in Gaithersburg, who feed, and then KIND, the group I told you about. But you brought up a good point. So maybe all of us in our faith community, we could just simply talk to our faith leader and say, why don't we do a little garden? Or why don't we do something with the local group to feed people? Because I think most people don't realize that just in our own our neighbors sometimes go hungry. And we don't know it because they're too proud to tell us. But the kids usually are the ones that say, I'm hungry. They will tell you. The adults will not tell you.
Yeah.
Are you seeing progress in this, or is it just sort of that's just keeps coming on?
Well, the answer is yes, there is progress because, number one, the county council and our county executive, they put money in the budgets to give some of these nonprofit groups I talked about. I do know from emails and so forth in the faith community, the issues coming up. So I believe that the fact that so many more people are hungry now because our population is growing, that the hope is that we as a community will come together and help those in need. And I would suggest for those who don't know about this issue, you could simply contact your local county council person because they are the ones that are actually funding some of these programs with your tax dollars. And they can tell you the groups you can volunteer with.
Well, you actually have five. You actually have a majority of the county council that represents each one of us. The 4 at large plus your own thing. So you can get a majority right around you. And I know you've gotten a majority just around Greg Wims.
But this is a very serious issue to me.
Yeah.
When I grew up, I wasn't hungry, but I know a couple of neighbors that they actually did go hungry. But we then, because it was a rural area, we would give them a food basket. We would just have food that we had and take it over to our neighbor. But from a young age, I know that there were people in Montgomery County actually that were hungry. And so this issue today, some 40 years later, still remains in my heart, and I try to do what I can to help.
One of the problems we have on this show is we cannot get Greg Wims back here enough. Promise me you're going to be back here on a regular basis, because there's so much more to talk to you about. So much more, your family, within Rotary, with the Victims' Rights Foundation. We got to keep this conversation going.
Be glad to come back.
Thanks, Greg.
Okay.
Hello, you.
Hi.
Rural
Maryland.
Charlotte Davis.
Yes.
The queen of the rural areas, from Committee on Montgomery to or from Montgomery to the rural areas. What happened in the General Assembly? Because you are dependent on the General Assembly's understanding and acceptance and really what they're willing to do for the rural.
Yeah, because we're an independent state agency, so we are completely funded through the state's operating budget. I'm funded under the Maryland Department of Agriculture. So we have 2 grant programs, one which has never been funded until FY17. We're really excited about
They're
it.
calling it the Charlotte program, right?
It's the Rural
Charlotte
Maryland
Success?
Prosperity Investment Fund.
Okay.
So we're going to be funding grant programs related to entrepreneurship.
Okay.
So we can grow our businesses. You know, we don't want to wait around for the Walmarts or the Amazon distribution centers to come in. We want good quality jobs in our rural areas so we can keep people in their communities so their wealth stays, their taxes stay. We're going to be funding infrastructure related to that.
Okay.
So things like broadband expansions, huge for us.
Good.
We have 20% of our residents lack access. And
Right.
we know that it's the fiber optic line is there, it's just they can't, the cable companies, the
You know,
ISPs don't have the impact.
I mean, we look at the transformation in different parts of the shore is maybe the greatest example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when it was isolated before transportation going out,
Yep.
especially communication going out, the jobs were limited to picking crabs, picking
Mm-hmm.
oysters, picking, you know, if you weren't the
Tomatoes,
owner,
melons.
tomatoes, melons, and all that stuff. And now you see the whole transformation there of
Mm-hmm.
electronics and so much more. Western Maryland seems to, I mean, a little bit of that as well,
Mm-hmm.
but I just look at what's happened on the Eastern Shore is a proof point.
Yeah, our real success story is Southern Maryland, Calvert County, St. Mary's, and Charles. Their per capita income rivals that of Anne Arundel and Howard. Now they do commute out. They're heavily reliant on defense because of the base and government. They drive up to Washington.
Now,
but
before, I
that's
know a
it.
lot of people have got questions. Is there a website people want to learn
Yes,
more?
rural.maryland.gov. So most of our documents are up there. If you have any questions on our programs, they're up there. So
The program that is being funded for business, I'm ignorant as to rural America. I'm a city girl. So what kind of businesses are you talking about?
well, generally we're looking at agribusiness, but anything. You know, we would love to have biotech and high tech, cyber tech. It's just not going. We need to look at what we do well. What we do well is agriculture. So we're heavily reliant on, poultry industry, and if we want to move past that, we need to look at what we do well with that and figure out how we can get people to be
Value added.
sustainable, value added.
Are there any limitations because of the ag reserve and those?
Well, they can still conduct commercial activities on those. It's just we want to make sure that the land isn't being diverted into other uses that may not. We want to make sure that it's being used in the best way. So if it's fertile
It's not
soil,
a parking lot. It's
right? We don't. If it's fertile soil, you don't want to just build houses on it because that's pretty valuable. And we want to make sure that we're resilient because California's got a drought. You never know what's going to happen with supply chain, with how we distribute our food in.
What I wanted to ask is there like an real effort to sort of not build all these condos and so forth, to have and not even put biotech, which I know you're talking about, to have it green space
Yes.
so our children can see trees and
Yes.
farmland.
Well, we
about
support
that.
program open space. So 1% of your transfer taxes when you buy a piece of property goes dedicated to land preservation. That's what's helping preserve the land here in the Ag Reserve. And so there's 4 programs, Department of Natural Resources with our park development. The locals get a portion of that. Then there's the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation. And so they buy easements on that property so that it's preserved. It will always be agriculture. Problem is within the last decade, the legislature's been diverting that funding and using it to fund other things, for education, which, during the financial crisis, yeah, absolutely.
Well, we need that back if we want our
Right.
legacy.
I got a quick one. This last session, was there a wish list, a top priority that you didn't get but that you want for next time?
Well, we didn't
Good point.
get
45 seconds left.
manufacturing. That is we've lost all our manufacturing jobs. These are those middle income quality jobs, and they've all gone. So we'd like to bring in, there was a tax credit program to kind of reinvigorate manufacturing and benefit even our urban areas.
Well, I think of Hagerstown, Cumberland. Those are 2 of the key areas
Right.
where we've seen the devastation.
They're half the size they were because of the loss of manufacturing jobs.
30 seconds. What do you see happening? What are you going to be doing with this fund now? Your
Well, we're
entrepreneurs-
hopeful to build, local jobs and to healthcare services because, we see mental health is a huge issue. Substance use disorder is a problem in our areas as well. And hopefully we can improve some of those, the quality of life in rural areas.
Well, what you've done today by being with us is you've improved our quality of life. So thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for joining me today here. And thank all of you and the viewing audience for joining us for this week's edition of Montgomery Week in Review. I'm Don Moores, inviting you to join us next week at this very